Hello, everyone. This is the Amazon Lily Roundtable, which we have Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. Whenever we get up to it, right? But we had a really fantastic time last time, so I wanted to do this again. We have an amazing group of individuals here. I'm really excited to have them talk. We're going to change things up a little bit, though, right? Because our friend Katie here, she's going to be moderating this, right? And she's also going to be a panelist, so she's going to keep things moving along, but also, take part in discussion as well, right? So, what I do most of the time, right? I'm gonna actually take myself off screen, so that'll be it. But one last thing, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, right? If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, right? And make sure notifications are on so you oh, I guess I never asked for that. Yeah, turn on YouTube notifications. Yeah, why not? Do that too. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and also become a YouTube member. Hit that join button if you appreciate all this content that we give to you daily. Right? Then hit that join button and help us out so that we can continue this on into the future. Okay. So I'm going to take myself off screen. I'll add that other person if they get here. But if not, then we'll just have to go with these amazing group of people right here. All right. I'll let Katie take it away. Oh, that worked
Yeah.
out well.
So I just want to quickly say it's kind of weird because I am participating as a panelist, but also I will be moderating. So I will try to not get drunk with power and just like mute all of you all the time so I can talk. I'm joking. I'm gonna try to not talk a lot, and we'll see how that goes. But I don't really think we'll need that. I think we're civil people who can just let other people speak and just take our turns. So I'm sure we'll be fine. So we're doing introductions now. So Erudite, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So hi, everyone. I don't think I've actually gotten to talk to anyone on this panel except for Katie. My name is Not So Erudite. I'm a new streamer on the Twitch scene. I've got training in psychology. I'm a licensed addictions counselor and a psychometrist, and then going to grad school for clinical psych. So that's kind of my background. Yeah, and I talk about socio-political stuff, and I'm excited to chat with you all.
Lana?
Oh, hi. I'm Lana. I'm not a streamer. I'm just like a nerd who likes to talk about shit on the internet, so I'm hanging out.
As we all do. Merrick? You're muted now.
Professional streamer moments. Yeah, I am a sex worker advocate. I am a leftist on mostly, I think, known on Twitter. Occasionally, I've been trying to get back into streaming. Occasionally, I make pre-made YouTube video stuff. Yeah, I think I'm mostly known for Twitter though. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Prime. And yeah, I'm very excited to talk about, as I said earlier, something that is not Ukraine or Russia.
Amen to that. Anna?
I'm Anna, and I am currently in my master's program for clinical psychology. I'm specializing in trauma, and I am also certified in domestic abuse counseling. Yeah.
I'm Katie. Okay, so we're gonna jump into it, I guess. So the first topic is as follows. What do you do or feel like women should do to increase communication with sexual partners and generally improve sexual engagement? Advice is usually relegated to what should women avoid or deny from happening. But what are active things women can and should do to improve their sexual experiences, and how should they handle it when they feel like their boundaries are being pushed upon in a way that makes them uncomfortable? We're looking for women should do, not women shouldn't do. And if we're going to do opening statements, I guess, we'll just do the same order. So like Erudite, you can go first.
Sure. I don't really have much to say. I think there's a lot of things that women can do. I think like stating boundaries and voicing what you need and want is just like fundamentally the most important thing in sex and relationships overall. I just think communication requires it. People can't brain read. I think there's lots of reasons why people might struggle to communicate, and I think it's important to talk about those aspects and give people tools and equip them to overcome those issues. I'm just really passionate about women having good, safe sex and being able to assert their wants and needs. Yeah, that's about it.
Lana?
I think that one of the things that is really hard for like men is a lot of times like women, assuming everyone's like hetero, a lot of times like women don't really even convey their desires. A lot of times they're made to be like uncomfortable about even like talking about the concept of sex. So definitely like being more upfront about what you do like is really helpful. I've definitely gotten a lot of feedback from my personal partners like that me communicating what I actually do like is really helpful. I find that this seems to be like really uncommon for women, where they just like won't even really tell other people what they like. And because of it, they like men are kind of like guessing a lot of times. I also think that like women should kind of like work on in general just the concept of being more assertive. It isn't women's fault that they're basically pressured to be like doormats for people to step on, but it is something that on an individual level, like it is good advice to like work on setting boundaries in general, like even outside of sex, just like in the relationship. I have personal tips that I give women on a personal basis, like for like basically testing boundaries with people to make sure that that person is respectful before you really engage in sex with them. Again, that's not like a thing that if you don't do it, like you're a terrible person or something, but it is really helpful in gauging people's character and whether or not they'll like respect you in other scenarios.
Okay, Eric? Wait. Eric, hello.
Eric's muted.
Hi.
Sorry, I heard you say a name. I didn't realize it was
Yes,
my,
I'm sorry.
my name. No, that was my bad. Yeah, so I think that in terms of what women should do, I think that there should be more emphasis and more discussions about how it's actually really, really good for you to state your boundaries and to state the kind of things that you would like to see happen in a sexual encounter, and not to be made to feel like you're a buzzkill, or not to be made to feel like it's sort of infringing on the other person's enjoyment. I think like a lot of the times, I in the past, and I know other women tend to be sort of reticent about their boundaries. So I think that like a really good thing to do is asserting your boundaries in a way that's not aggressive, but that can also be, I think you can make it sort of fun, you can make it sort of sexy, that sort of thing, and just having like confidence in knowing what you want and being able to talk about that beforehand with a sexual encounter, whether that's, you're talking to someone in person or whether you're talking to someone on Twitter, on Tinder, things like that. That these are things that should be prioritized.
Anna?
Yeah, I pretty much agreed with everything everyone said so far. Also, I would add that I think it's also really important for, both men and women need to like be able to communicate, or at least try to communicate their boundaries. Really have like that boundary discussion beforehand is always good. But not only like sexual boundaries, but like emotional boundaries too, which are a part of sexual boundaries. I think that sometimes gets like lost in talking about boundaries with sex, is that like emotional boundaries are really important as well, that people should talk about with their partner beforehand to make sure everyone is on the same page. Yeah.
I think that I don't think there's anything to disagree with anything anyone said. I think I would like to hear Erudite's actual tools to like try to help with communication breakdowns, and also Lana, the personal tips. I would really love for us to actually get to like the meat of it. But there's also something that like the common theme is that women should like assert their boundaries and they should talk about what they like. And I found that like in my own personal experiences, it hasn't been too long since I started asking myself at the age of 25, what do I like? I think when we expect women to say what they like, we sometimes maybe ignore that some women they don't even know that they're supposed to ask themselves that they're supposed to explore that's like something that is valid to like have as your own personal understanding of your own sexuality. And I think that's part of the discussion that needs to be handled as well. So like, how do you explore yourself? How do you end up knowing what you like? Because I feel like a lot of women don't know what they like, and it's hard to communicate what's wrong when you don't even know what's right. So yeah, we're gonna open it up. um Lana, can I hear some of the tips that you have?
Um, so like for example, like I think it's really important to like outside of like sex or outside of like any sort of like super emotionally charged situation, you basically draw boundaries with someone who you're like who is like a prospective partner, and you like specifically pick something that doesn't actually bother you, and you like watch their reaction. And if they try to argue with you, if they try to make you feel bad for setting that boundary, if they try to you know uh basically like make you feel bad for setting a boundary, then you just don't engage with that person, because it seems like that'll be more of an issue later on.
Okay. Erudite?
Do you want my tips or do you want my response to Lana?
Whatever you want to give, I'm good.
Sure. Okay, I'll maybe get into a response. I think the idea of testing boundaries is probably not something that I would be behind advocating for, particularly when you say it's a boundary that you don't really care about, because boundaries are inherently going to like trigger some level of rejection, right? Boundaries are necessarily saying this is something that I don't want crossed, and sometimes people might be okay with that, but if it's something that they were hoping wouldn't be a boundary, there's going to be a certain level of like tension that arises with it, right? So when I'm teaching boundaries to women, typically, I try to make them aware that any boundary you give, there is potentially going to be some level of potentially pushback. Not that that necessarily okays the pushback or okays even like some people feel bad setting a boundary, even if there's no pushback, but somebody just gets like sad about it, right? And so that makes them uncomfortable. And I think if you're setting boundaries for things that you don't actually care about, it's hard to get in behind of like why this matters to you. And I think when you assert boundaries, it's really important to actually like make clear what your needs are. And I think it can actually muddy the communication water when you're stating boundaries for things that you just don't care about. Now, I might have just misunderstood you. Maybe you're saying, well, it's not that I don't care about these boundaries. They're just a less emotionally charged boundary for me. And that's maybe a fair discrepancy. But I think the idea of like testing in relationships in general feels kind of like gamey almost. And I'm actually really for like very authentic, open communication. And I don't want to be testing people. I just want to have like kind of respectful discourse back and forth.
So I think what you're talking about is probably really applicable to like longer term relationships for sure, where you like actually know the person. When I'm hooking up with people I barely fucking know, I'm gonna reject a hug to see if they like give me shit about it. Because if they make me do something I don't want to do, outside of bed, like something that like I don't owe them and they don't really want that much, but like I don't like if it happens, like if like okay, so from my experience, like so I'm a stripper, and like where I work, I know men all the time who like watch me set a boundary and then they're into it. They don't fucking care about kissing me on the mouth, but if I say I don't want to do that, then they want it, right? And so there's a specific way that I've personally encountered that men are like attracted to pushing certain boundaries, and I don't want to deal with that shit when I'm hooking up with people. Like there's maybe a time and a place, you know, with a partner where you guys can talk about that, and that's like a thing you're into or something like that. That's completely fine and separate. But like when I'm hooking up with people, I'm trying to get to know you. I'm trying to make sure like I'm not gonna like I'm coming out of the night like I'm gonna like reject things that I don't actually care about. Then if they happen, like it's fine. And I just know that like it's probably not going to work out that night for me. Now, obviously, like if you're talking about like someone you're actually interested in, you're like planning like some sort of like future together, sure. But like I don't think there's any harm in me rejecting a hug from someone, and rejecting like going somewhere with someone at a like particular time or things like that. Like things that like really don't matter in the context of like you know, were they really excited about this thing or something like that? Like something that shows that if you set a boundary that they will respect it, basically.
Erudite, do you want to respond, or can Merrick like quickly get a word
Yeah,
in?
go ahead. Yeah.
So I guess I just want to say that while there might be some utility to this method, I guess I would advise you to be careful with this mentality, because I was a stripper for 6 or 7 years. And I found that when I was dancing, like you're talking about, you mentioned specifically, I will set a boundary and men won't care about it until I set it, and then they care about it in the context of them wanting to push it. I guess I would just want to advise you to be sort of careful with this mentality, because I found that when I was dancing, I had this vision of men and of the outside world as being very predatory, very dangerous. Every man was trying to hurt me. Every man was trying to fuck me over. Every man was going to push my boundaries. And I found that this was actually a trauma response. So I guess I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, you shouldn't do that. But I guess I would just say, like, maybe something to consider with this is that this is possibly a trauma response to being in an environment where your boundaries are not actually respected regularly. And I don't know that this is necessarily a healthy way to go about things, of just like trying to shit test people about stuff that doesn't necessarily matter. And I would caution you to kind of like, I don't know. I guess I just don't know that when I was doing stuff like that, I was in a really healthy place. So without like overstepping too much, I guess I want to sort of give the perspective of like, this might be trauma informed, and that's something that you might want to consider, because I know that when I did shit like that, it was really unhealthy.
I feel like I mean, like for people that I'm hooking up with, like, yeah, maybe, but I don't think in the context of stripping that's true for me, because it's like a vibe check thing where there's like some people where like, you know, they're just chill and they're like a normal person. There's people who are like more on the edge, and then there's people where like you can tell they're like there to like constantly push the envelope, and like
I
it's just
think
kind
you
of
should
like,
do this in the club. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I didn't mean to say like don't be careful in the club. You should always be careful in the club. I definitely didn't mean to say that.
Yeah, I got you. I don't know. It depends. Like, I feel like, again, like I feel like it's like a vibe check thing where it's like there's some people where I feel like they do actually respect my boundaries, and there's people where it's like kind of a toss up, and there's people where like they're constantly just trying to push you, and it's like if I want to have sex with a fuck boy, like a guy who looks like a fuck boy, he acts like a fuck boy, I need to know like what I'm getting into before I start. You know what I mean? And like it's totally context dependent. I don't think it's like fair in all situations, but like I think sometimes it's like a nice tool to like recognize, is someone going to respect my boundaries without also having to like emotionally invest, like, oh, I'm going to tell them what my boundaries are, and then if they don't respect it, like I'm the one who gets hurt in this situation. And like there are definitely places you should do it, but I feel like there's some times where it's like especially if it's something that you're like trying to like work up to, like the concept of like your boundaries getting violated can be like super like upsetting. And like if that's something you're working on, like I feel like that's kind of like a good like training wheel. Obviously you shouldn't do it forever, but I feel like it's not unreasonable to say that like you don't owe people things, and if you set boundaries and they don't respect it, sometimes the way that they react can inform like who they are as a person.
So I want to quickly like let Valkyrie like introduce herself so she can jump in, and we'll continue from there. Hi.
Sure, yeah, hi. Came in halfway through the conversation, so I wasn't really sure what was even going on. But hi, what do you want to know about me, or?
Whatever you want to tell, but let me send you the prompt that I read out loud so you could read it, and then you'll know
Oh, yeah,
exactly
yeah.
what you're on. And so if that's your intro, then Eric, you want to respond, I think, right? Merrick?
Yeah, I
Oh.
guess I guess I would just say if you're being like discerning about it, yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you're just like in every situation, like every date you go on with every man you meet, if you're like always shit testing them always, that is probably unhealthy. But if it's something that you know that like is not always appropriate in every situation and you're being very discerning about, then like, yeah, I don't really think that you're doing anything that is potentially damaging to yourself. I would also just kind of note that like I think people can also pick up when you're doing that. But again, like if you are if you're discerning about it, then whatever, you're a grown woman, you know how to make your own choices in your own situations. So
I don't want to jump in here. It's not on the woman at all. It's actually a lot of women miss it, and men are just freaking stupid. And just the thing of it is you think they're actually there. You think they actually feel on that other side. They think they feel everything you feel, but they fucking don't. They're not there. They don't see it. But at the same time, you know, you're conversing with each other as peers. You know, you both have this shared experience. It's obvious, you know, because both of you've had this happened before. At the end of the day, what you guys are trying to work around, and you know, what should the woman do to, you know, improve this? And the other part of it is the woman actually has to get her mind around he can't see all the effort she's putting into it, and then she worries about that, and she worries about the effort that she put into it, you know, not being enough, and then it just kind of builds from there, and then there's communication breakdown and shit from there. So really, at the end of the day, it doesn't start at the woman. It comes more from the woman understanding the guy she's with or whoever the hell she's with.
Well, yeah,
But
I think what we want to discuss is like ways in which women could more effectively communicate whatever it is internal experience that they're having. So like their partner could be aware of what's happening and like take that into account. But to just do like, I feel a lot of things and they're just not there, and that's why this is happening because they can't intuit what I'm going on. Sure, I would want a partner to try to be attentive, but I know from my personal experiences that's not always going to be possible. So we want to like maximize communication, which I think is like the main topic.
Yeah, I mean,
wanna-
am I able to jump in?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I guess imagine if we said all the same things that you just said, Valkyrie, but we just said it about women, right? Like women, they should just mind read men. They should just know. Like it should just all start from them. I think like in general, when like I'm all for educating women and just teaching them things. And I don't think men are perfect by any means. Men fuck up all the time. But in general, I think like if we would call it misogynist to say these things about women, then it's misandrist to say it about men.
No. You got it kind of messed up there too. So on one half, men get mopey about, you know, shit they've done. They think you're mad at them and they don't know why. Does it ever happen with the other dichotomy? When does that ever happen in the other direction? And that's what I'm getting at right now, because that never fucking happens in the other direction.
You've never had a woman get mopey when you reject them.
I'm talking about guys. I'm talking about guys right now. I'm not talking about,
it doesn't happen the other way. So I'm asking, have you never had that experience?
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. You're twisting it up here. So on one hand, guys get mopey when they don't know what they've done, right? Yeah. I mean,
some do. I'm definitely not going to make a blanket statement about all right. So
some do. Has there ever been a woman in history that's ever done something wrong and a man wouldn't just tell them outright, or the woman couldn't figure out what they did wrong, and then they got mopey about it for days and days until, you know, they could figure it out? Has that ever fucking happened? Is what I'm getting at.
I would
Probably,
say
but I mean,
very likely that has happened. Probably.
Okay, well, if we're talking about statistics, can you put a percentage on it?
I wouldn't put a percentage because when I'm talking about statistics, I'm very, very precise when I talk about them. So, like, I could guesstimate, but it would be meaningless.
Sure, let's guesstimate a ratio.
Probably it happens just as often as men.
I want to guesstimate maybe like 80 on the male side, 20 on the female side. I mean, I'm sure it happens on both sides, but what I'm getting at, you know, originally with all this is you're playing the female side of things as they're the victim, they have to accommodate, and I don't think that's really where we should be right now as far as this conversation goes.
No, but no one was saying that, right? We're trying to say the opposite. We don't want women to accommodate. We want them to be able and capable to exactly do the opposite. So not accommodate, not tolerate, not just allow for things to happen, right?
Can I respond to? I wanted to say that like I really agreed strongly with what Merrick was saying about the trauma response thing. You know, since like I'm studying trauma right now, usually like when people test boundaries, like the whole testing boundaries things, like it tends, like not in every case, but it does tend to be considered something that's like more of a trauma response. And I'm not sure if I think I would just say that like it's important to remember that when if you're gonna like test boundaries, like a guy could feel like that's kind of manipulative. So you just want to keep that in mind, that it could come across like, not that I'm saying you're trying to be, it's just that like it could come across as like slightly manipulative. And, like that's just something to keep in mind.
Do you I so like again, like I'm talking about like just as an example. So if I'm like going out, I'm drunk, I'm hanging out with my friends, and like I see a guy that I'm interested in, and I don't know much about him. I really can't like talk like I really can't have an in-depth conversation about our boundaries and our expectations. I'm kind of drunk and like I'm not really like there all the way. And like he says like, "Hey, let's do this." And I may want to do one thing but not another. And I'm aware of that. And he isn't, and I may express that, but it may or may not like go however. So I don't like I'm not talking about like, hey, I don't really like I'm not talking about like I don't know, like pretending I'm not interested at all or something like that. I'm saying like, hey, maybe I would want to have sex tonight, but like I'm just gonna like say no tonight and maybe like give you my number and we could do it another time. I'm not talking about like entirely removing something off the table or saying I'm not comfortable with this or even like making any sort of accusation that they're like making me uncomfortable by doing XYZ or whatever. I'm just saying like, hey, like I may want to bang you, but like maybe I don't want to hug or something like that. You know what I mean? And like I've actually felt that way before. And like maybe I'm kind of indifferent about the hug, but like maybe like I just say no because I just want to see like how he reacts basically. And like there are and like again, like if you're working on a relationship with this person, you probably shouldn't do that because you should trust them, right? Like you should be approaching a relationship under the assumption that you do trust them. But like there are definitely situations where like I'm just really not going to be able to discern someone's character, and like do I have trauma that I don't want to relive? Sure, yeah, but like I also like feel like this is like an okay tool in some situations, but I agree it's not great for all people in all situations, and there are a lot of situations where I would definitely say it's actively harmful, like in a real relationship that you're pursuing.
Merrick, could you mute yourself when you're not talking, by the way? Do you mind if I quickly interject my 2 cents and then Erudite and then Merrick can go? I'm actually kind of torn on this. I think what Lana is talking about is a very specific situation where there isn't a future with this guy. It's just a rando. You don't know them. And I'd be interested in exploring, I guess. I understand that maybe her acting out something that might come from like a place that isn't good for her might be harmful to her. I'm just not sure how this method is like very like what would be the downsides if this isn't a relationship thing, it's just like a one night stand type of situation. But what I wanted to touch on that for me, because I'm really interested in like concrete tips to how to what we tell women to be assertive, we tell them to speak their boundaries, but I know that's really hard for me. So something I do is that if I have a good relationship with someone, I communicate to them, I would like practicing enforcing boundaries with you. So I get really uncomfortable to say no. And like, I'll know that you'll be sad, and that makes me sad. So I don't say no enough, even when I should. So I would like to practice that with you. Are you okay? And like most guys, obviously, if they're your friend or your fuck buddy or whatever, they should be fine with that. And then you can just practice that with them. They could be like, "Can I hug you?" And I say, "No." And it's not testing whether they respect it or not. It's just my ability, having corrective experiences where you get to say no and the person's just like, "Cool, whatever, let's move on." And I think that can build a lot of help in terms of being able to assert yourself later on in situations where there's more pressure. So I just wanted to slide that in. Erudite?
Yeah. So I'm gonna say like I totally agree with Anna here in that like it doesn't just come across manipulative. The reality like it is manipulative, but the thing is like manipulative is a very spicy word in our culture where it's like you're a really bad person if you're manipulative. But the reality is like right, you mentioned it for like safety in the club. I'm just willing to give you the benefit of doubt. I haven't worked in that position. If that's a tool that like keeps you actually really safe in your workplace, that's fucking great. And like it might be a little bit manipulative, but like it doesn't matter. It's keeping you safe. The trade-off is worth it. My issue is when it comes to even casual relationships. I think encouraging this like kind of gamey language makes me nervous because it muddies up communication a fair bit, right? I would prefer to encourage somebody. Why don't you voice things like what your do's and don'ts are beforehand and see how they react. So that way you're getting to test and you're actually voicing clear boundaries. I'm concerned that when you say boundaries that aren't your boundaries, it comes across a little bit like crying wolf, right? If you say like, no, I don't want to hug, but then like 10 seconds later you do want to hug, it actually confuses people, right? Where they're like, wait, so what are the conditions under which I can and cannot hug you, right? And obviously in ideal communication, they should be voicing that in return and being like, hey, I noticed there's kind of some miscommunication here. You said no to a hug before, and now you're asking me to hug you, right? Let's say that happened in a situation, right? They should be communicating it. But I think in general, when you're voicing boundaries that aren't real boundaries, it really muddies up because there's almost an element of like crying wolf because there's this piece of saying, I'm not okay with this, but the reality is you actually are okay with it, right? And that's not the purpose of a boundary. And I think it can actually deteriorate the efficacy of a boundary.
Lana, you can respond if you want, and then we'll let Merrick talk because you wanted to, right, Merrick?
So like if I'm about to hook up with someone that I've never really met before, I don't really know them, and I don't plan on seeing them ever again. Like, so let's say my only boundary is like, don't choke me. Like, everything else is fine, just don't choke me. Well, let's say if they do choke me, I'll get so upset that like I won't even like end the encounter. I'll just like freeze up and like freak out, and it'll just be horrible for me. And yeah, I could wait for him to just like maybe choke me like because I said no. But I really don't know this person, and I can just hope, right, that he's not going to choke me. But, he's in his 20s, and I don't know why, but like guys who are like in their early 20s, they think it's okay to just go up to people and just start choking them. I'm just going to say that's been like my actual experience. Like, it's been my experience in the club, and I'm not like mega bothered by choking. I'm just like bringing this up. But if I were actually really upset by choking, I would never fuck anyone in their 20s. Holy shit, because they'll just like straight up like at the club, they'll just like they won't even say anything. They'll just fucking like grab my neck, and I'm like, I don't know like who taught you to do this, but you need to stop watching porn. But like the reality is like I'm not gonna wait for it to get to that point where I'm really upset to like draw a boundary. Like I'll communicate it before. I'll tell them up front, like, hey, don't choke me. They'll do it anyway. And maybe, right, like I can hope, right, that they won't do that. But I've had the experience so many times where I tell people my boundaries up front and they don't respect them. I'm very clear. I am very communicative. So for me, the idea that I'm gonna like wait until like they're gonna do something that actually upsets me, right, and that I'm not allowed to like draw any other prior boundaries to things that I just like mildly dislike, because like women are expected to do what men want, right? There's a lot of social pressure to do things just because men want them in general, and they're gonna focus on well, I don't really like doing this, but it'll make him happy, right? Like women will focus on these things and that like pressure. So they have to overcome that pressure and wait for the few things that they're really not okay with, because it's mega fucked up, especially in this situation that why is my phone going off? I don't know why. And then like in this situation that like Kate is bringing up, like people who really don't know how to draw boundaries, like waiting until you're absolutely upset about the situation is not going to make it easier to like deal with that experience.
But nobody's
correctly.
saying that. I'm not advocating that you wait until you're super, super distressed to voice your boundaries, right? So I'll give you an example just from my personal anecdote. When I started getting more oh, do you want to go to Merrick?
I feel like she's waited for a bit.
Yeah,
Is
go
that
for
okay?
it.
Muted.
Oh, you're muted.
I guess I just feel like we are talking about like kind of different things here, right? So
yeah, I feel there's a miscommunication happening.
right. So I think that Erudite is absolutely correct when she's talking about like, so there's a couple of things going on here. I think one, you sort of make things a little bit confusing and you muddy the waters a little bit when you shit test people, because most people know when they're being shit tested. And I think there's also a lot of neurodivergent people where if they're like, hey, can I hug you? And you're just like, no. Like, I definitely think that that can be kind of like weird for people. So, I mean, maybe you're not going about it that way. Maybe you're being like, hey, I'd really rather not do that. I'm not comfortable with that. And that's great. One second. Okay, sorry, I think the barking is over. But I mean, I just think that there's also like things that you have to do at the club nobody should say shit to you about. I don't care what, I mean, unless you're talking about like hurting people, nobody can say anything to you about what you have to do to keep yourself safe at the club. Girl, I understand. I was there. I've had people try to kill me in VIP. I've had people literally like hit me, fucking closed fist hit me on stage in front of other people, and everyone was just kind of like, whatever. I get it. The things that you have to do to keep yourself safe at the club, I don't want to fucking hear it from anybody. But when you're dating people and when you're out in like another situation, I worry that like it kind of makes things weird for everyone involved if you're just like testing just to test, just kind of pushing and pushing and
But
pushing.
I feel like she was very clear, right? She's not talking about dating. And I think that's where the miscommunication happens. We're talking about like one night stand hookups, not dating.
But
that
I mean,
is casual dating to some
casual
extent.
dating,
Like that's
yeah.
different than working at a strip club, though, right? Like what
Well,
you're with the social
the
engagement
distinction.
and the scripts that you need for working at the strip club is going to be different than like a random Tinder hookup that you've met. Like,
These are
and I
different
thought we were
social
talking about random Tinder
Yeah.
hookups, not clients from the club. Because I agree with
Yeah.
Merrick. Like, there's a lot of safety risks with like go fucking ham. I don't care. I'm talking about Tinder casual dating relationships.
So if I meet someone for the first time, I'm just like supposed to assume they're not going to push my boundaries, and I'm just going to tell them and just hope that I'm just supposed to expect that a guy will not violate my boundaries. I'm very confused by this concept, to
Do you
be
think that there's an
perfectly
answer in
honest.
between? Do you think that there's an answer in between what
There
you're
is.
saying?
You punch him
Like,
in the
you're
dick.
saying the extreme opposite, right? Making it seem like we're claiming this really extreme opposite thing to what you're claiming. And I'm not doing that. I'm definitely more in the central space. Do you think that there's an alternative?
I think there's a way to read people's body language and to read people's intentions without like putting yourself in a mental state where you feel like you have to shit test every man, because I don't think that's good. Personally, I don't think that's good for you either. And I don't think that this is like necessarily a positive thing for us to suggest other women do. I'm just, this concept makes me uncomfortable, and I do think that there is something less extreme that would probably be healthier to teach people.
I need to ask a question because maybe like I'm not getting something. When we're saying, I understand how it could be harmful for the person doing the testing. Okay, so like I get that. I used to do a lot of tests when I was younger, came from insecurities. Like I don't do that shit anymore, or I try my best not to. It's not good. It's not helpful to you. It's not helpful to them. It's not helpful generally. What the distinction that I'm drawing and why I don't see, I don't understand this type of pushback is that, like, if it's a Tinder date and then we're hoping there'll be more dates, fine. But in the context that like this isn't a person that you're trying to build a rapport with, the only way that I find like the critique of Lana's like tip that is worthwhile, that maybe like if you shit test boundaries beforehand and say no to a hug, maybe later on in the actual sexual encounter, they would also be confused. So I think that's a legitimate argument. But if we're talking about muddying the water of communication, like over long periods of times or over building a relationship, I don't think that's what she's talking about. And maybe I'm like completely off the mark, Lana, but that's what I got.
Right within that relationship too, right? Like a relationship is
but that's not a relationship that she wants to retain, right?
But you do want to have safe sex with this individual. So you want to
Yes.
make sure that when you make boundaries that they respect them and they understand clearly what they are. Because here's the issue is right now we are just coming out of the creepy 2003 like dating culture where they basically said like literally that when women aren't interested, you should push more. And women and men were both encouraging this. There was actively women telling men all the time, oh, the reason I said no to you is because you didn't try hard enough, which is fucking rapey. Because if I say no to a guy, I want it to just mean no. But a lot of guys, especially younger men, don't understand this concept very well because they've grown up seeing on Hollywood and seeing in social media that if a guy should just try harder, if he just pushes a little longer, not only is that acceptable, but it's romantic. And it's Hollywood romantic, in fact.
I'm
And
with
so
you on that. I agree with you on that.
this is the precept of when you don't know somebody, right? You can't assume what their knowledge is of communication, whether they're going to be able to understand that you are only testing them and not get them to be triggered. I think the neurodivergent example is really, really important. And within that section, you want to make sure that you can communicate what your boundaries are clearly and know that they understand them before you're engaging in, especially if you're in a private space, engaging in sex with them, where you have a lot less options for safety, right? And I think that this muddying affects the actual instance with that individual.
But what she's trying to test is if this person are going to have reactions during the sexual encounter. And again, I feel this is a bit confusing to me about why the healthiness of the communication matters when the relationship isn't meant to be retained over like a one night period. And I understand that it would affect the sex, but like if she's trying to ascertain if this person is going to treat her well and respect her boundaries while having sex, and they get triggered by her saying, I don't want a hug, that's a pretty good fucking hint that maybe you shouldn't have sex with that guy.
Okay,
Can I
I
give
mean,
a-
not necessarily. I don't think so because I think that it's very cold.
I think this is really disrespectful to neurodivergent people because I think like if I was out with a guy and I was like, hey, can I hug you? And he was like, no, I wouldn't. That doesn't mean that like later on if we hook up, I'm gonna stick my finger in his ass without his consent, but I am gonna be like, oh God, what did I do? Why is he out here with me? Like, what did I say that was wrong? Like, I feel like when you're just, I don't know. I don't know that saying like, if you say something that's like very out of social norms and someone is like, thinks that they're going to hook up with you later and you reject like a small form of affection, being like, oh, that person, they're going to rape you later or they're going to push your boundaries. I think that's really, really unhealthy, especially because there are a lot of men who are not that like who are not quite as socially intelligent as women, but that doesn't mean that they're predators, right? So you can really confuse and upset people with that, and I don't think it's fair to be like, they'll push your boundaries, they won't respect you later.
So I'll just say this quick thing, and then I'll let Lana respond. I think in my head I got confused because like I know that for me, I might actually want to reject like a hug. So I'm operating from the perspective that the boundaries established are boundaries that are actually yours. And what I'm hearing is like, well, if you don't want the guy to hug you, but you still might want to hook up later, you shouldn't say that. But I don't think that's what we're talking about. So I think I got my own personal like issues mixed with Lana's argument. So that was like my bad, I think. But Lana, do you want to say anything?
I also don't like, for example, like, I mean, I can be interested in someone and like be like, I just don't want to hug you right now. Like, it's not like, oh, like just because I don't want something right now doesn't mean I won't want it later. And like that happens in sex. Like, and if you're gonna get upset about me not wanting a hug at one point, like for any reason, even if neurodivergence is the reason, if you're gonna get upset about the concept that I don't want to hug at one point and then I do want it later, and you're gonna say that because I changed my mind that I'm upsetting you, we shouldn't have sex, like 100%. And it's totally fair of people to feel that way, right? Like, hey, like, why didn't you want this like right when I wanted it? Like, that's fine. And there are people who are into that. I'm like not like that. Like, when I have sex, I don't know what I want. Like, I need time to like get comfortable. And like, if me changing my mind is upsetting, we shouldn't have sex. And I don't think that's unreasonable.
It's not about changing your mind though, because when you're talking about shit testing, how this started was you were talking about, you say a boundary that you don't actually care about, just to see how they react. And the issue is that a major saying within the incel movement is that women just shit test men all the time, right? If you literally don't want to hug at first and you do later, you're allowed to change your mind. Of course you are. You can communicate that, right? And if they're like, oh, I'm confused, you didn't want to hug before, be like, yeah, I didn't actually want to hug then. I wasn't as comfortable with you now, but I am really comfortable with you, right? And you can just explain that, especially for neurodivergent people who might not understand that shift, right? I'm not saying you can't say no to a hug at first and then you can say, of course you can. Of course boundaries change, right? As you become comfortable. What I'm saying is you shouldn't be saying no if you actually don't feel that way. You just come up with something to basically say no to them that you don't care about, right? Because that's the manipulation, confusing part.
Yeah.
So
I think there's another part of this, right? That's we're not talking about it's not about upsetting people. I think it's more about confusing people, right? And the other thing is I also think that you should want to be honest, right? You should want to be able to be comfortable. And if you're especially with the choking thing, I think just being hey, I don't want to be choked. That's one thing. But I also think that if you know you're going to have a really serious reaction to something, I think you should be honest and be comfortable and be hey, I'm telling you right now, don't choke me later or don't choke me during sex. I think you should feel comfortable being able to be I'm not just saying this because I don't want it. I'm saying this because I have a very bad reaction to this. This really matters to me. This is a really important boundary for me. I want to encourage women to feel comfortable being this boundary really matters and it's very important, and you don't have to be you don't have to catastrophize it, but I would rather women feel comfortable being explaining, hey, look, I will be really upset if you disrespect this boundary, rather than this kind of manipulative trick stuff. And
So-
I think someone said earlier manipulative is a dirty word. I don't want to come across right now I'm saying manipulative is a dirty word, more just the actual literal definition of manipulative. So I hope that's clear.
But wait. I don't think. Wait, hold on. Wait, okay, maybe I'm just a little confused with this whole choking thing, because if someone just tried to choke me, I would think they're trying to murder me or something. I would be really scared. I don't know. Isn't that normal? People don't just go choking people, right?
A lot of girls like that. A lot of girls.
I've definitely had guys where they don't even talk about it, they don't even ask, they just start choking you, and you're like, dude, I didn't want that, and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? It's so, and it's well,
That's scary. That's genuinely scary. Wow.
So can I maybe give us a counter example to think about? Because I think what's really important.
Can I
Sure.
first interject?
Yeah.
So this is kind of frustrating. Obviously, nothing that you both are saying, Merrick and Erudite, is wrong, right? The issue for me, I think, and what I'm interested in doing, is that obviously, optimally, ideally, all women would be able to continuously communicate in the best way possible and continuously assert their boundaries while also trusting whatever partner they might have and navigate all situations properly. As a person myself that has a lot of issues with asserting boundaries, I'm looking for techniques. Is this the best thing ever? No. If Lana says, hey, this is a tip I have for women who might get intimidated during a sexual encounter, if you want to feel safer and this isn't a relationship you want to maintain, here's something you can do. It's not the best, but we have a few people in psychology field here. It's a coping mechanism. Nobody said it's the best one. Nobody said it's the most effective or most optimal. Nobody said it doesn't come with a cost to yourself too. But it's if all we're going to say is women should communicate openly and honestly and always communicate and assert and stuff, it's that's great. I personally know that I can't really do that. So that advice doesn't really help me. I would need other tips of what do I do when I get scared? What I can do to make myself feel more comfortable beforehand? What I can communicate with a partner in a way that will be safe enough for me to communicate, all these things. So I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but it's kind of for me, it just sounds like I don't want to get into a situation with a one night stand where the one time I have to actually assert my real boundaries or boundaries that are important to me, they'll be crossed. So what I do, I check it with a less intense boundary. But I do understand that there's an issue where we see the tip as shit testing. And I do think that's a problem. I guess for me, it always like came across like, maybe I don't want to hug right now, you know? So that seems like a legitimate way of asserting boundaries. And maybe that's where the most miscommunication is happening. Because you guys have like shit testing in mind. And for me, it's more like asserting boundaries that isn't, don't choke me, you know? Because there are a lot smaller, less significant boundaries that are still worth like trying to maintain and like establish beforehand. So that's
Right.
just what I wanted to say.
So what I guess I would say is we're on a public panel with dominantly men probably watching, which means that fundamentally we're in a slightly educational position right now. My concern is that from an educational landscape, what Lana said verbatim was really fucking terrible education, right? Shit testing is a really bad idea, and I especially don't want a bunch of men who are maybe already embittered towards women thinking, oh, women are just advocating to shit test men. That's fucking annoying. I want to give a counter example. How would we all feel if a bunch of men came on a panel and they were talking about how to figure out if a woman is a good partner to have a casual sexual relationship with, and maybe the main thing they're concerned about is that she's going to become like the quote unquote stereotype of like a crazy person, right? And they're like, so what you do is you test her. You just kind of make fun of her for something, not super big, just something that might make more insecure girls upset, and see how she reacts. And if she reacts big, oh, don't fucking sleep with her. She's crazy. How would we feel about that education, right? I feel like that's really, really, really not a good idea.
So I understand. And I think that's a valid critique to some extent. As far as I'm concerned, this is a women's panel. And if it's like, I guess in my head, it wasn't like a bunch of women are going to come on stream and give advice that would be like palatable to men, that they need to like, we optically manage like, so we're just servicing men right now. Cause I wanted to do the advice for women who might be listening. I get that the audience is predominantly male, and you can say, well, that was naive of you or whatever. But it's like, what I care about is educating women. I think if men like hear that advice, well, I'm not gonna go, Mary, can you mute yourself?
Sorry.
So I think the critique is legit to some extent, but I think that it's also, I think it's a bit unfair.
Would it be better if I said I would also say it's shit advice to give to women?
Can I
Broadly?
also?
Yeah, Lana, you can react.
So there's like obviously different models of like consent, right? And like there's different ones. There's like where if you say up until you say no, everything's okay. There's like you need a yes to do something. There's ones where it's like based around like, oh, you guys should respect each other as people, and you should know enough about them to like do things that are like within their like desires and preferences and boundaries and stuff like that. And there's like a couple other like models of consent, and I'm kind of getting a little confused here because at one point you're saying, well, men can't read your mind, so you have to state clearly what you want. And then when I like am basically just trying to make sure that men will respect my stated boundaries, like I'm being told that it's dishonest to like have questions about that, especially when I'm interacting with someone I don't really know. And then I'm also being accused of being like basically that I'm gonna cause mistrust with people that I don't know and don't know me, that they're gonna know that I'm shit testing them, which like I don't like if they're gonna rely too much on actual body language and like reading me and like getting to know me as a person, then like what's the point of using the stated boundaries if they can just read my mind? Like I'm like again like going under the assumption I don't know this person very well, I don't have any trust in them. I guess my option in this scenario is like don't have sex with them because I don't know how they're going to react to my boundaries, and that like in theory sounds great. Like I would love to just like never have casual sex. There's just times when I like get horny and I don't know if I can trust people, and I would love if any of you have like a suggestion that might be better. I just don't think trusting strangers is like a good option either for me personally in my experiences.
I mean, I'll
So
be
if-
honest. I tell women like don't have sex with strangers. I just straight up say don't do it because like I think it is really dangerous. But okay, sorry. That's just that's what I tell women. That's my advice to women.
Yeah, that's one piece of
like,
advice that we
And,
can
and we said that's not the kind of advice we'll be doing. We
Yeah,
hear
like-
that advice a lot. So
Women
let's
should
do
have
it.
sex with people they know. There we go. We'll state it
Like,
differently.
They
I
know,
think
yeah.
that's a very fair engagement with what I said. That's correct.
Okay. Could I go through maybe some tips? Because I actually educate women on like boundaries all the time in my work in the addictions field. Because in the addictions field, when I'm working dominantly with homeless women who have histories of homelessness, unsurprisingly, they have lots of histories of lots of domestic abuse and issues with boundaries, unsurprisingly, as a result. When I talk to women about boundaries, I outline boundaries as a scale from 0 to 10, okay? So you can set a boundary at level 0, and you can also set a boundary at level 10, okay? What is not considered a boundary is abuse, okay? So beating people up, all those things, obviously, that's not a boundary. That's called being abusive. So in a situation, I mostly recommend if they're going to be engaging in much more casual things, they should probably have 3 levels of boundaries pre-prepared in mind that can broadly work for most people to get themselves safe. A really simple boundary that's a really low soft one is if you're uncomfortable saying, I need to go to the bathroom. That gets you out of the situation. It allows some of the tension to boil down, and you can be in there as long as you fucking want, right? You can close and lock the door and settle your heart. Really importantly, I remind them, try to bring your phone with you when you go into the bathroom, okay? If you're panicking, like you feel like the sex is getting into a space where you're not comfortable with, and you also don't know if you can state boundaries, make sure you say, hey, can I just go to the bathroom? It's a really, really, really easy boundary tip because it doesn't even look like a boundary, right? And so if you're really worried about like them getting upset in the reaction, that can be a really safe way to get yourself space to figure out what you actually need in this sexual encounter, which might be that you need to end the sexual encounter. So I'd call that like a level 1 or level 0 boundary. You should also have prepared a level 5 boundary, which is much firmer, right? And you can figure out the wording that you'd like to use with it. It could be something like, hey, I'm not really comfortable with you doing that, okay? And then you need to probably have a level 9 to 10 boundary prepared as well, which is some sort of thing of like a stronger escalation, which I honestly recommend people only do more often in public, which might be something like, you need to leave now, or I'm going to call the police. That could be a level 10 option. Or you could do a level 9. If I'm really, really uncomfortable and you say it really loud in a space so that people can hear you, it could also potentially just be screaming out and being like, I'm really uncomfortable right now. Please stop, right? That would be a really, really strong boundary. And women should have these things prepared before if they want to engage in more casual sex. Those are really simple go-to tools so that they feel like they have an out regarding depending on the level of intensity that they need to administer.
Can we is the casual sex qualifier a requirement? Because I've been in many relationships where, because as I've said repeatedly, like if a person has an issue establishing boundaries, they're going to have a hard time doing that, as far as I'm concerned, whether it's casual sex or not. So
I think these
I'm
boundaries
just
could be
asking.
used regardless. I just stuck with casual sex because that was kind of the scope of our conversation right now, and I
Okay,
didn't want to
I'm
leap
just
to another
making sure.
area. But I would say honestly, the boundaries could be useful for like understanding level 1 to level 10 boundaries has helped a lot of my clients navigate not just intimate relationships as well, just relationships with their parents that are toxic, like all sorts of relationships where they don't know how to just tell people to give them space and to assert what their space is.
Do you have any strategies or tips for what happens if you end up freezing a little bit, or if you don't feel like you can verbally assert, like you can identify what boundary is being like infringed upon in that moment, but you don't seem to be able to speak out as openly as what you would recommend?
Yeah, so I actually have experienced freezing because I have kind of childhood history with abuse stuff, and so for me, I never did casual sex personally. I would dissociate and freeze, and I knew it was a really, really dangerous setting for me, and it wasn't
Yeah.
something I was able to do. So this might not necessarily apply, but for me, that was my comfort level, as I just didn't do casual sexual relationships because I couldn't make it safe enough for myself. What I did though, once I got into dating relationships, is once I was aware. So unfortunately, the first time sucks because if you don't know you're gonna freeze, you don't know you're gonna freeze, and you just have to fucking pray to God that like they pick up on the freezing cue, right? So the first time, I'm not here to like point a finger or do anything with that. I was really lucky in the freezing situation where when I froze, my partner noticed right away and it just like paused and pulled back and was like, "Are you okay?" And I couldn't respond for about 2 to 5 minutes, right? Because I was really dissociated too. And then when I came back, I was also again really lucky. I had a partner who respected that. So if you are in this situation where like I didn't have that luck, that's fucking horrible, and I'm just sorry.
Yeah.
Like there's
I
nothing
was
else to
gonna
say
say.
beyond that. But all I'm gonna say is that sucks. I'm really sorry. That's fucking horrifying. I can't imagine. After I knew that I had a freezing reaction, I was very clear to tell my partner when I was like in a casual conversation. So this is my boyfriend, while we were like walking around town and talking about it. Obviously, we needed to talk about it. I was like, I think what I experienced is a bit of a freeze. This is what I'd like you to do. And I didn't know what I'd like him to do. I just kind of guessed on what I would recommend to a friend. And it wasn't precisely what I needed, but it was better than him being like, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck? Like, what's going on? Do you want me, like, what do I do? Especially if I go silent for 5 minutes. So I was able to just kind of communicate what I needed. For me, for dissociation, I found like, bidirectional stimulation. Probably Anna can tell you more about this than I can as a trauma specialist, but like bidirectional stimulation really helps me come out of dissociation. Getting up and walking around and getting space was a really big thing for me. So him moving away and me kind of getting up when I can and walking around. And
I'm
just
really
like getting
happy
out
for
of
you
space.
because
Yeah.
I freeze and I would disassociate a lot, but I didn't have awareness. So like for the first 3 years of like sexually engaging, I didn't even know I was dissociating every time there was like a sexual encounter, right? So and then like I tried counteracting for the disassociation, but then it just resulted in I could not disassociate, but then I would just be freezing because there would still be uncomfortableness. So I could like not disassociate, but it's still like not being capable of properly engaging. So I'm really happy for you that that experience went the way that it did. Like I think that sounds awesome.
Yeah, and I genuinely want to say, like, for women who are like listening and haven't had that experience, it's just fucking tragic and horrific. And that's like kind of the beginning and the end for me. And what we do is once we know that that freezing happens, how do we respond healthily afterwards? Just one second.
Anna, Merrick, Lana, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I would add is that, like, you know, when I worked for 5 years as a crisis counselor, so like that was where I sort of got like my training and certification in like doing like domestic abuse, and like also it was like rape crisis counseling too. So it was like a whole crisis hotline thing. And like pretty much like and like so 5 years of talking with victims and stuff, and like most almost I can't even, it's like so like I learned from that experience that like so many victims freeze up. And like yeah, it's unfortunate because it is like a trauma response. It's really like, you know, it's literally like the amygdala in your brain like going off like, oh, this is a threat here. Like it's the fight flight freeze response, you know. It's actually a fourth one. But yeah,
And
I
appeased,
I think it's
I
really
think is the
helpful for
fourth one.
men to like, I think it's good for men to know that like this is actually really common. A lot of women do actually have this like freeze response. And it's just I think it's something that's good for everyone to sort of know about. Yeah. And just kind
And
of
that's
be
kind of
aware of that. Yeah.
and that's kind of the frustration I have because if we recognize that this is a very like predominant thing, like or common enough in women, um,
Yeah.
I don't think a reasonable response is to say all these women then shouldn't engage in a type of sexual activity. And Erudite, I get that for you, there's like a distinction between like hookups or like casual sex versus dating. But again, coming from my experience, like if you have that amount of like freezing and disassociation, like all of those sexual experiences happen with partners, right? If you have like a freeze response, you'll just get triggered in the moment, has nothing to do with the partner like pushing boundaries or not, right? So that's why I get personally frustrated with that reaction because it would basically if all women who freeze up occasionally or disassociate or have a hard time asserting themselves just like don't do any of that, well, first of all, they're never going to get better because you need those corrective experiences. So you need to come into to like the encounter with proper coping tools and like trying to make a good experience out of it. If you just deny yourself sex like forever because you might have like a freezing response, then you'll never be able to have good sex, which is unfortunate. I would want people to know that that's what's happening for them. Learning that I was disassociated for like 3 years while like engaging sexually was a huge thing for me. And there was a lot of work on like trying to engage sexually without being dissociated. And now I can recognize I do a lot of pre-work to prevent the freezing. And like for example, and this kind of reminds me of what Lana said earlier on when we were talking about it. I tell guys, look, I have a really hard time asserting boundaries. So I would appreciate it. And this is early encounters. Later on, I kind of loosen up on it a bit. But like first few encounters, I'm like, please don't ask things of me. Because when you ask things of me, I might be uncomfortable saying no. And like, if I can't assert myself in that moment, then that's going to be really difficult for me. So just don't do that.
How would you feel about making a recommendation to women? Because in general, like when I have clients with lots of like freeze things, I'm very reticent to ever be recommending casual sex, but I understand from your standpoint of like, well, I don't want to get into a long-term relationship necessarily, but I do want to be engaging in sex, right? What do you think about like kind of the alternative being like, well, for you, probably for your needs, it might be wiser to be engaging in casual sex with people that you know a little bit better. So it might not be a good idea to do it on the first time you meet, but maybe on the second or third. So you have a bit more time to vet out and estate what you're comfortable with. And it's like, it might seem like, oh, this is so oppressive to the victim, but I'm like, this might actually make you have, because we want people who have lots of trauma particularly to be having the most healthy, like safe, right? If you have a traumatized individual and then they have a really bad casual sexual encounter, that's going to make that whole trauma 80 times fucking worse, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving them opportunities to have the healthiest, safest sex.
No, I don't have a dispute there. Like that makes perfect sense, right? Lana, are you muted?
Was I muted?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I would love to like avoid casual sex as a whole. That would be great. If I had like if I have a regular partner and everything's fine, cool. I like definitely like I both like have bipolar, so like I experience like periods of hypersexuality. And like yeah, like is that not great like for me? Like sure, but like do I have control over that? Like no. And like I also like just like sex and I shouldn't have to like avoid getting sex that I want because it's my job to like be a you know like a psychology major to like basically like have the healthiest sex possible to not possibly you know have some man have his reputation ruined by me setting boundaries that he wasn't ready for, something like that. Like I understand what you're trying to say, but I really don't feel like in any situation, even in a situation where I'm interested in someone, that I owe anyone any act, even if I'm interested. Like and I don't think it's unreasonable for me to say no, because I don't think that I like owe other people anything. Like I'm supposed to reject like all casual sex because it's healthier for me, but I'm not allowed to reject a hug in anticipation for me building trust with someone that I don't know, so that we might be able to have sex, right? Like as a form of building trust. To me that just like doesn't make sense and seems like it's on me to mitigate like all of my mental health issues and like become an expert on them in every way and always be healthy, even though like my needs and like my trauma like kind of contradict, but like men can't just like get over the fact that like you know there may be like times where I'm okay with one thing and not another. Like
So I don't really know who you're. So nobody is saying you just can't have casual sex. I haven't really said that. I said I honestly strongly don't recommend it. The same reason why I wouldn't recommend women to go and get really, really drunk on a first date where the man drove them to a public location and they have no way of getting back home. That's another scenario that I generally wouldn't recommend. And that isn't to say that you can't do it, but broadly I wouldn't recommend it, right? So that's not like that conversation isn't happening. Just to make that clear. No one's saying you can't have casual sex. You're an adult. You do whatever the fuck you want, right? If you don't want to do things like you're like, well, what about it? What if I want to do something that isn't psychologically healthy for me? You can do that. We do that shit all the time, right? I do it all the time. I do things where I'm like, I know I should probably be doing like my meditative breathing to help me manage like my overly like stressed out system, but I don't a lot of the time. You get to make those decisions, right? But when we're coming from like an educational lens, we want to talk about like what is best practice and how do we navigate these situations, and also what's just okay practice, and then what's also like probably just shouldn't be recommending it, right?
I understand, but it feels like a lot of conversation is about like optimal practice. And it's not that it's bad. And I get that you're coming from it from a very educational lens. But the problem is that I feel that like we haven't had that conversation yet. I haven't had this conversation with anyone really yet. This concept of, there seems to be this notion, look, if you're going to engage sexually and you don't know it's going to be a good experience and you know that it might be harmful for you psychologically because something might happen, then don't do it. And that's the advice. And I'm like, well, if this is a capable adult, they're able to like, and this is why I'm not talking about victims. I'm not talking about being abused by someone. I'm talking about entering to a consensual like hookup or whatever, any sexual act that nothing abusive or nothing victimizing actually happened. Like the experience might you feel victimized in your own like, and if you're being triggered in that moment, you might feel very much re-victimized, but that's not really what I mean, right? But I think I've engaged in sexual encounters that I knew that I would probably freeze. And I knew that. And I've engaged anyway because I weighed my options as an adult. And I was like, yes, this might add or this might not be the best, but here are the reasons why I do want to do this and I do want to engage in this. And I think not acknowledging that that's a valid thing, that not everyone is constantly obligated to hyper optimize their mental health journey, especially when we're talking about like giving advice to women about like restricting themselves sexually. I don't know, it just seems very like reductive to me. You know what I'm saying?
Safe. I think if you're risking regularly going into freezing and getting into a situation where you're actually going to come away traumatized, I am going to always be recommending against something that could seriously traumatize you, because I don't take trauma seriously, and I will do it at the cost of like kind of more or less like your will and want and pleasure every single time. Now, am I going to judge you for engaging casual sex? No, I don't give a fuck what you guys do. Like, to be honest, like morally, I don't care. Like, do whatever you want, but I'm never going to side and just be like, yeah, it is okay. Like, I'm like,
no,
I would say it's not
I don't
good,
think anyone,
but you can
I don't
do
think
it.
anyone is asking to like have your stamp of approval on their like sexual encounters, right? I just think, and I think Erudite, where you and I would come to heads is just that I feel like a lot of the way that you choose to discuss this is from the educational perspective of like educating the masses and like general advice that would be beneficial to most people. And like whether it's reasonable or not, for me, whether I'm on stream or on panel or on a BC, like I engage with the people there. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm talking to the five of you and that's it. And I'm just sharing my experiences and like, and that's just like a difference that we have. So I'm not
Why are we doing
saying,
this publicly?
what do you mean?
Like, if it's
I don't
just us
have an
five,
issue with that.
like, why
Like,
are we doing this publicly if it's just the five of us? What's the purpose
for
in the
me.
public part? Yeah,
For me.
yeah, because you're hosting it, right? So I'm just curious.
Okay. Well, I believe that there's a lot that could be taught from listening to people talk about things. And like this panel specifically, this topic was about like trying to, at least for me, educate women in terms of stuff they could do to make sexual experiences better for them, right? So, but I don't see it as educational. Like this is a funny story. I reached out to Lana because she was a mod of the Feminist Guild on CC. And I told her, hey, I want to have a panel where we all just trauma dump. Because I feel like guys don't get the amount of trauma that a lot of women have and how prevalent that is. And I want to like shock them, to show them that it's not a fucking random thing that happens to like one in a blue moon, that a lot of women from a lot of different cultures and backgrounds and all have these experiences because it's a systemic social issue that happens. And she said, look, I don't want to do that. I want to do this in an educational way. So if we want to give advice, that's fine. But I don't think us sitting in a panel format and doing that is something that I'm comfortable with doing. And that's just like a difference in perspectives, and that's fine, right? So I'm not, I guess, expecting your like seal of approval. I'm just, maybe I want advice for women who are in my situation, because I feel like it's pretty obvious that everyone is like, you should have safe sex. I feel like that's pretty basic, you know. So whatever is good for, I don't know who's out there like telling women that they should engage in sex if it's horribly traumatizing for them. Like that was not advice that was given ever by anyone. So to give that counter advice, like women aren't trying to keep themselves safe, is just like personally annoying to me. But yeah, Lana?
It's kind of like, so I'm realizing now, I think we're kind of like talking past each other. Like, I agree in theory, like it would be a lot healthier to like do all of the things that I think Erudite is like saying. But
Me
I
too.
just think there are just people who are like in situations where like, you know, there's a transition to being healthy all the time or most of the time. And I don't think that better has to be the enemy of best. You know what I mean? Like, and like even in the BDSM community, I forget they used to use safe, sane, and consensual, but now they use like risk aware and something. It's like rack. I forget what it is. But it's basically like risk aware consensual sex. So it's like, you know, it's just like changing that term acknowledges that like, you know, not everyone can like promise that everything's going to be like sane in a sense, in that you know, like there are neurodivergent people, and also like, you know, people do have trauma that can like get in the way of them having a healthy relationship with sex, and even like the particular encounter that they're like interested in. And you know, like again, like if you go back to like looking at different models for consent, you know, I think that they all apply in certain situations, right? Like you are obviously going to have a lot more of a you know, authentic relationship where, you know, if you're with somebody long term, you can kind of like talk about all of your boundaries, and you can kind of like work out what's best for you, and you can definitely like have a lot of those conversations. I think there are situations where using only the consent model for like, you have to get an affirmative to like continue, like particularly with people with a lot of trauma, like that's probably a good idea. Where you have to get permission before you do anything. And I think like when you're operating with new people, that's like something men should do and think about. Is that they should, you know, really get explicit permission before they like interact in a specific act with somebody new. But I think, you know, it's a lot more common, and it's pushed by men, and I would argue by patriarchy, that women are the arbiters of um like, you know, women are like the arbiters of basically boundaries, and like women are expected to like basically take on the whole burden of saying what they are and aren't comfortable with, and like men are allowed to just basically do things, and then you have to say no. And this is like the norm, that this is like the expectation. So I just think it's a little difficult when you're put in that position. And so I think it would be great if we could move to a model where like you get permission to do things with new people particularly. But in the meantime, there are things that are probably not going to be great for both parties, because the whole entire system of doing that is kind of like not great.
I also think that maybe this is an important caveat to say. Like when I talk about women having the agency and the ability to like agree to engage in situations that might have a higher risk than zero, I don't think that if they get hurt in that situation, that should be put on the guy. And again, it's different when you're being victimized and abused in that situation. If I just didn't communicate my boundaries and the guy asked if I was okay and like I didn't really say anything, that's not on him as far as I'm concerned. That's like a risk that I chose to take. So I get that there's like a fear of like, I know talking to guys that I inform them ahead of time. Look, we might do something and I might get hurt. And I need you to know that and to consent, because if you're not okay with that, because some guys, they would be really upset and they'll say, well, if I can't trust you, then I don't want to do this. And I'm like, that's completely fair, that's valid, like it's fine, because you never want to be in that position, that's okay. A lot of guys say, okay, whatever. I don't hold that against them, I don't think that's a problem, and I don't blame them afterwards that they victimized me or something like that. But that is something that I do communicate. I think it's good. And there's a way to engage in behaviors that are not optimal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the other person needs to be condemned. And I think that's a part we didn't really touch on. So I want to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where I'm getting is like the reason why traditionally women are the sole arbiters of boundaries is because in a traditional gendered, like when we're talking traditional, I mean like older, like 1960s, 1970s standard gender roles, men were to be the pursuers and women were the gatekeepers. That's
Yeah.
why that model got set up. And I think we'd all agree that that's a pretty shit model, especially in 2022 when women are completely capable. Here's the thing: when we empower women and we give them a voice, is now they have both the privileges and the responsibilities just the same as men. Men need to be communicating boundaries. Men need to be voicing this. Men do get sexually assaulted and they get really distressed by it and they don't know what to fucking do about it because there isn't a lot. And I know we're not talking about men, so we don't need to get into that, right? Right? Women also need to be voicing boundaries. They need to be speaking up. And in general, like if I'm in a public panel where we're talking about models of boundaries, we're talking about models of consent and all these things, like it's educational in nature. That's why I'm talking about this from an educational lens. Of course, as an adult, you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? The issue is that if it is going to have negative impacts for you, you also then have to take responsibility for the negative impacts that it has for you.
But who
I
hasn't? Do you feel like people don't do that? Do you feel like women don't do that?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Then I agree. Yeah, I think you should take their resp. But it's like I feel like at least I shared a lot about myself. As far as I'm concerned, I do take the responsibility of the
Yeah,
actions of what happens,
I think
right?
you
And
do.
I think
Yeah.
that's how people should engage, honestly.
I
Like
think you're really nice, and I think you actually hold yourself to a higher standard than you hold other individuals because you hold a lot of compassion and space for them, which I think is really great. The issue is that we have to figure out a way to both hold compassion and space for women, but also say, hey, you don't need to be infantilized anymore. And these are some of the ways that you don't need to be infantilized anymore. You can voice your boundaries, you can voice exactly what you want, but try not to be manipulative. Don't say things that you don't want because that's just confusing, especially for our neurodivergent friends.
I agree with you, right? I don't want women infantilized, right? I just like when is the infantilization happens? When somebody says women don't have to communicate their boundaries, women don't need to, men are just supposed to like read that? Because I'm not, maybe I'm just not in the right spaces, but like that's not the conversations I'm having. I'm just saying when you say we need to voice our consent, we need to voice our enthusiasm, we need to assert boundaries and all these things, what I'm operating on is I completely agree with you. Some people are not very capable of doing that, and I want to talk about them.
Mhm.
And
But I'm
how
not going to
it's
recommend that they have lots of casual sex for those specific individuals.
that's fair. I never
They can
asked you to do
choose
that.
to. They can totally choose to. But I think as an educator, which is more of the role that I have, which to be honest, I'm going to argue that this is an educational space. That's why we're having a public discussion about it, not a private one. Is that as an educator, I'm going to say it's probably going to lead to more harm than good because you won't have an established relationship to assert the boundaries and needs that you have to keep you safe. And you're in a position where you need every sexual encounter to go well and to be healing. That's what you need, because that's what you do with PTSD treatment is you try to give them a whole bunch of exposures over and over and over again that are calming, soothing, and make that situation less distressing in their mind. And I can't guarantee you that, in fact, I can guarantee you that if you are just engaging in lots of casual sex without knowing that partner at all, there is a high likelihood that you could get harmed. And I don't want that for you. That's why I'm saying it. It's not to say you're a bad girl for having casual sex, which I know lots of people are saying, and fuck those people. I don't give a fuck about them. They're wrong. And I'll debate them just as much, like just as fiery. I will, because like that's fucking garbage. But I'm going to do the flip side. I'm going to be accountable on both sides, basically.
Okay. I think we ran the course and we should go to the second topic, unless anyone has more final thoughts. Okay, good.